The news of the day involving the new Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, continues, and we're now seeing a competing narrative established about how he got elected and what his purpose is going to be, and all of these things. And the one thing we know to be true is that the Cardinals who elected him did so based on unity. They have seen the church is deeply, deeply divided, that there's interesting conflict going on within the mystical body of Christ, and they want to put a stop to it. Understandably so. And while a lot of traditionally minded Catholics have serious reservations about this Pope, most of us are willing to see what happens before we start resisting and all the rest of that stuff. We want this conflict to end as well. But let's give you an update first, because it's related to the conclave. Because credible sources had reported after the conclave was over that Cardinals Burke, Serra, and Erdo, along with Cardinal Dolan, had been the kingmakers in the conclave. The reporting had been that then Cardinal Prevost had been seen meeting with Burke in his Vatican apartment during the general congregations, and that the conservatives had rallied around him. At this point, the news is that it's probably not true, as probably one of the best American or Western journalists who spends a lot of time reporting on Vatican things reveals. He has his new article in the National Catholic Register, and they published this. I'm not going to go over this article in a whole lot of detail because I don't know if Taylor Marshall covered this. I know Joe McClain did. If you want to go see his, want more detail, go check his out. But the headline is Cardinals voting patterns emerge as Leo XIV is welcomed as a Pope of Peace. Support for the new Pope, who is seen as a conciliatory figure, accelerated after the second ballot and coalesced into a large winning majority on the fourth. Now, I will revisit this article in the coming days because there's an elephant in the room, and that is that all these cardinals swore an oath of secrecy not to tell us what happened at the conclave, and yet some of them are clearly running their mouths, and that's actually a central theme to what we're talking about today. And again, not going to go into the detail of this article here too much, but here's a relevant summary of everything. Burke, according to Edward Penton, one of the best journalists in the game, never met with Cardinal Prevost ahead of time. When the balloting was going on, it looked like Burke and Serra had backed Erdo, the Hungarian, while Parolin and Tagle were duking it out among the more Bergoglian cardinals. Parolin collapsed, and Erdo could not get the votes he needed for an actually traditionally minded cardinal to become pope, which allowed Cupich and Dolan to back Prevost to rally the African and Asian cardinals to his side, and the rest is history. That's noteworthy for a number of reasons. Cupich and the African and Asian cardinals, because it puts context to this story. A lot of people look at the church in Africa as the future, and the church in Africa is going to save the church. I always am the bearer of bad news with you on this, but the church in Africa is not keeping up with the growth of the population in Africa. It means it's not really growing as much as people like to think it is. And second, the bishops of Africa, when they resisted fiducia supplicans, said also that they want the church to change its teaching on polyamory because it doesn't work in Africa. I reported on that in detail back when that hit the news. So again, Africa is not where you want to look for pure orthodoxy. But it was Cupich and the African and Asian cardinals. And there's another bit of context there, which is Cardinal Parolin couldn't get any of them to back him. Africa and Asian are the place where China is making the biggest political incursions there. So again, the China deal ends up being what stopped Parolin. Now, if you're wondering why we know what happened to the conclave, again, since the cardinals are sworn to secrecy, I will cover that in coming days. But they've all been running their mouths about it. And what the line is between running your mouth and earning the automatic excommunication for revealing conclave secrets is far above my pay grade. But the story does provide context. In that story, we also get this whole running of the mouth thing. And this comes from Monday Vatican, who gives a very good, I think, summary of this. Leo XIV, the Pope, called to bring unity. And unity is the key to understand it. This article perfectly encapsulates what I think. An attempt to manipulate the Pope and the cardinals he'll surround himself with. The article places this information, though, sprinkled throughout with a lot of other things that aren't relevant. So I just summarized it into a kind of a long quote here. Here's what they have to say. Quote, when the cardinals elected Pope Francis, they gave him the mandate to reform the Curia. There is still a good deal of reforming to do, perhaps even more than there was when Francis took the reins in 2013. But when the Cardinals elected Leo XIV, they were giving him a mandate to bring unity. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re explained this in the Missa pro Elegenda Romana Pontifici that opened the conclave. Re's homily contained no word or quote regarding Pope Francis, not even a passing reference. That was already a sign that the Cardinals had decided as a body to turn the page. The Franciscan candidates never gained traction, largely because the liberal wing was divided against itself. All their potential candidates melted like snow in the sun. The silent majority of cardinals from Asia and Africa, frequently ignored in media surveys, were organizing themselves to look at the church beyond Francis. Pope Francis's Guardians of the Revolution left messages in the media and the homilies of the Novem Dials, the masses for the 9 days of official mourning. There is no going back from Pope Francis's reforms. Let's try not to lose Pope Francis's legacy, etc. Those now appear as desperate attempts to stop a wave already moving in another direction. 12 years of Pope Francis had created a clash of civilizations between the Old World, Latin America, and North America. It was the time to turn the page on the Francis era, and Prevost was the man with the resume that best fit the job to hand. The Old World was a bit disillusioned by Francis, who brushed aside the trappings of tradition when he didn't bulldoze them. North America felt scorned by the Pope, who came from the Antipodes, and Latin America was elated by the fact that it could finally be the center of the world, at least at first. There was an extreme imbalance, in short. Pope Francis imposed the Latin American mentality on Rome, not entirely unlike the manner in which Western powers imposed democratic forms of government on former colonial holdings and their peoples, who had no real familiarity with those forms. It was about imposing a universe of symbols on a world that had another universe of symbols. From the beginning of Pope Francis's pontificate, there was talk of making Latin American theology a source theology to core. The theme of synodality in the Latin American sense of the term had been included and transformed into an institution, the world of popular movements, as scholas occurrentes had also been brought into the limelight, if not the mainstream. The world had not only come to the Vatican, but had been institutionalized by force. The result was topsy-turvy. In addition, Pope Francis's entire world of reference was one that harbored strong resentment towards the U.S. and looked with fear at the theology of prosperity that he saw emerging in some American evangelical circuits. However reasonable one's unease with the prosperity gospel, however well-founded one's fears of American hard power may have been, conflation of the two and reduction of the United States to one or the other or both was disastrous. Prevost carries all these worlds within himself. He comes from North America. He knows the language of South America, and he spoke of synodality, which should be interpreted as a sort of listening and participation. But he is above all profoundly Western. He is a man of America, both North and South, but he is above all a Western man. In short, the Cardinals look to him as the man with the pedigree necessary to bring harmony. End quote. Now, if he's called to bring unity, it means he can't really rock the boat. You can't rock the boat and bring unity. You can't push the agenda to an extreme end, even slowly, without shattering unity. He can't push the boundaries of heresy as some traditionalists fear, nor can he go full bore and restore things to the pre-Vatican II state of the church, or at least push too hard in that direction, as some more mainstream-minded Catholics may want. The narrative we get from the conclave is that most cardinals want synodality to continue and do not go back. And it looks like the synodality version they endorse is that listening stuff, which is the least problematic thing about synodality. Beyond that, it depends on to whom you listen to. And this is where we get the manipulation. A narrative is being constructed by Cardinals Supich and Hollerich that somehow the Holy Father will build unity in the church and restore peace while pushing Pope Francis's program forward. That is a contradiction. You can't do that. Well, here, let me give you an example of this. Headline from Vida Nueva. Cardinal Supich on the conclave. Before the vote count that elected Leo XIV was finished, we burst into applause. Cardinal Supich has been running his mouth about the conclave. He swore an oath of secrecy. And I don't know where the line is between giving ideas of what happened at a conclave and being automatically excommunicated. And I don't know what that line is because after every conclave, cardinals on all sides of it start telling you what happened. Here's what our Cardinal Supich had to say. Quote, When the votes reached 89, everyone applauded. We didn't even wait. They continued counting the votes later. At that point, when everyone was certain of the 89, the number needed to be elected pope, you could feel the excitement as the votes were announced. This is how Cardinal Blaise Cupich, Archbishop of Chicago, recalled in an interview with America Magazine the moment when Cardinal Robert Prevost was officially elected pope. In fact, Cupich was one of 10 American cardinal electors in the conclave that elected the country's first pope. Now he emphasized that if anything has tipped the balance in favor of the now Leo XIV, it is that he is, quote, a very hardworking man who in many ways approaches the church with the same vision as Pope Francis. He also expressed that there is a genuine affection for Pope Francis within the College of Cardinals, and that at no point would they seek any other option other than to continue along the path he paved, end quote. Get ready to continue hearing that kind of line from him, by the way, and from others, because as you're going to see here, that is the narrative that is being promoted by Cupich and some other cardinals. The same vision as Francis. Does that appear to be true? Well, at least, no, not at least entirely. We will find out together. But here's more manipulation. And this is coming from a secular media outlet that is clearly aligned with Cupich and that entire wing. That's The Hill. Headline: Chicago Archbishop says Pope Leo will focus on immigration, the illicit trade of controlled substances, and of course, the rising oceans. Sounds a lot like Pope Francis, right? Maybe, maybe not. Here are the details. Quote: Cardinal Blaise Cupich, the Archbishop of Chicago, said on Sunday that he thinks Pope Leo XIV will carry forward Francis's commitment and focus on immigration, the thermometer problem, and illicitly moving people around. I think he's going to help complete and complement our political agenda. What wording from Cupich? Hear that again. I think he's going to help complete and complement our political agenda, Cupich told ABC News' Martha Raddatz in a This Week interview from Vatican City. He'll still talk a lot about immigrants as well because he knows about the sufferings of people and real needs that they have for a better life. And he knows, too, that people in Oceania, for instance, where the ocean is rising, are overwhelming those islands where people are trying to escape. He sees the illicit trade of substances that's happening in Central South America, where there are also implements from the U.S. going. He knows that those people need an option, and he'll call for, I think, as the bishops have in the U.S., fixing this broken immigration system, he added. In an interview on CBS's News Face the Nation, Cupich says he thinks Pope Leo feels an obligation to speak about these issues of the modern day, from artificial intelligence to world politics, as Francis did. End quote. He's not being subtle at all. That's what he's hoping to see, is the same program continuing. Now, the Holy Father will likely tackle all those things because they are the topics of the day, especially when he has come out and said that Catholic social teaching is something he's going to focus on. He has signaled that he is in continuity with Pope Francis, but that doesn't mean he's going to continue Francis's work either. If he's on a mission of unity, it may mean clarification of Francis' ideas that are essentially redefinitions of them. Synodality could be redefined to be more inclusive of voices not typically listened to, including very conservative and traditional Catholics whose parishes were weirdly left out of a lot of the synodal processes early on. Go back to the parish listening sessions and the surveys of parishes. My Latin Mass parish never got one, never got any of those surveys. And I've spoken to a lot of people who were in the same boat from all over the West. But this could also include not involving the radical decentralization of synodality to the point where the laity are elevated, something Francis was pushing. And we know that angered Francis's biggest supporters at the College of Cardinals during the conclave because some of them said as much in the pre-conclave general congregations that were open to public press. They blatantly said that decentralization had gone too far and that Francis was betraying the church that way. Their terminology, not mine. They spoke against that vision of synodality at the pre-conclave meetings. Now, America Magazine brings us another revealing take here. And America Magazine is one of the less trustworthy news outlets. Headline: Pope Leo XIV's message to the Cardinals. Vatican II and Pope Francis are here to stay. You begin seeing a pattern here, don't you? Certain factions want Francis's vision to continue. And it might. Wait and see before people jump to conclusions and start losing their minds. But this is what they're talking about here. So we're not going to go over the whole article because that would be really tedious, but we're just going to go here. This is what they're kind of hoping for. Quote, at this early stage of Leo XIV's pontificate, the text, his address to cardinals, is a must-read for Catholics. Here are a few notable takeaways. 1. Continuing to value humility like Pope Francis. Don't even get me started. A big question among Catholics these days has been to what degree will the new Pope carry on the initiatives of Pope Francis? Pope Leo put Francis's ministry in the long tradition of the succession of St. Peter, highlighting a few essential qualities and reminding the Church that the Pope has been a humble servant of God and of his brothers and sisters, and nothing more than this. Pope Francis, he said, was completely dedicated to service and to sober simplicity of life, abandoning himself to God until the very end of his life. Let us take up this precious legacy and continue on the journey, inspired by the same hope that is born of faith. What is most striking in Pope Leo's comments is the fact that he highlighted Pope Francis's teaching as, quote, evangelical principles that have always inspired and guided the life and activity of God's family. For those in the Church who felt Pope Francis was causing doctrinal confusion, inappropriately innovating and possibly leading the Church astray, Pope Leo XIV just reminded us of how his predecessor's ministry was rooted in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he linked the continuation of this approach to Petrine ministry to both Francis and Benedict XVI, referring to Jesus as the ultimate hope of all who sincerely seek truth, justice, peace, and fraternity, and citing both Benedict's encyclical Spe Salvi and Francis's bull for the Jubilee Year of Hope, Spes non confundit. 2. Continuing the implementation of the Second Vatican Council. In his address, Pope Leo stated categorically, I would like us to renew together today our complete commitment to the path that the Universal Church has now followed for decades in the wake of Vatican II. He then referenced a few fundamental principles of this implementation from Pope Francis's programmatic teaching document, Evangelii Gaudium, the Joy of the Gospel. That was, I believe, his first document. The first encyclical a pope releases, which usually happens pretty quickly after he takes office, lays out the entire framing of what they're going to do, what they plan to do anyway. 1, to the return to the primacy of Christ in proclamation. B, the missionary conversion of the entire Christian community. C, growth in collegiality and synodality. D, attention to the sensus fidei, especially in its most authentic and inclusive forms, such as popular piety. E, loving for the least and the rejected. F, courageous and trusting dialogue with the contemporary world and its various components and realities. And all that sounds fine, right? Generally speaking, that all sounds fine. It's how you go about doing it that became the problem under Francis. And of course, it goes on to say his choice of name reveals his priorities because, Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo XIII's encyclical, which I will have for you this weekend on this channel. It's an education document. Channel members and patrons have access to it already. It's one of the most important Vatican documents ever published in the modern world. And it's an interesting snapshot in time, but it has had a profound influence on the thinking of laymen and popes in the century and a half since its issuing, and I highly recommend you check that out when it comes out. But the most overt manipulation comes from the James Martin type bishops. And this is where we get to them being, I think, in La La Land. Headline from Info Vaticana. The Bishop of Majorca wants Pope Leo XIV to maintain an open line on that sin that James Martin has a weird interest in for a priest. Open line means open to revisiting the Church's teaching and bending it and contorting it out of complete recognition. And the reason they're saying this is because before he was Pope, Cardinal Prevost spoke about how he thought fiducia supplicans should be implemented according to the interpretation of it of each national bishops' conference, that they should have the final say on how it's implemented and what the text means, which would suggest that morality is subject to national conscience, that morality is different depending on the country. That would be relativism. However, again, we will see what he does as Pope with that document. And you can tell what he wants. He wants to maintain an open line on it. What do you think that means? From the article, quote, true to his ambiguous and controversial style, the prelate, that'd be Bishop Majorca, defends an open church, even on sensitive issues as that James Martin's sin, the participation of women in positions of power, and the relationship with a secularized society that is increasingly estranged from the gospel. The bishop doesn't hide his enthusiasm for the election of the new pope, whom he considers a direct heir to the pontificate of Francis. He must continue the line of openness. Here's the key word, must. He must. See what the bishop is doing. He must continue the line of openness, also with regard to that sin, the bishop affirms, in a statement that inevitably generates concern among those still waiting for clarity and doctrinal fidelity from their pastors. Far from reaffirming the church's constant teaching on the morality of the flesh, the bishop adopts a vague language, focusing on welcoming and accompanying those who live in situations objectively contrary to natural law and the church's magisterium. A pastoral approach devoid of truth, where love is disconnected from conversion, runs the risk of being merely a form of surrender to the dominant ideology. End quote. He goes on to talk about how great it is that women are governing Vatican City and all sorts of stuff right now, which is among the things that made some of Francis's biggest allies very angry, as they expressed it themselves at the pre-conclave open to the public general congregations. He must do this, says that bishop. He must. Really, he must. Now, if you look at the things Cardinal Prevost had written, and some of those are coming to light now, before he became Pope Leo XIV, you're going to find that his language that he used in his documents, whether they were theses he wrote in seminary or statements he made as cardinal, weren't really ambiguous, because he's a canon lawyer, and lawyers don't typically engage in ambiguous writings. And he's an Augustinian, and despite the state of the Augustinians these days, you can't get away with ambiguity as an Augustinian or as a canon lawyer. It just doesn't work. Now, that bishop is obviously not the only one. The Holy Father said before that he was elected Pope that he thinks that the National Bishop Conference should have a say on how Fiducia Supplicans is handled. And again, that's problematic because it's relativistic in nature. But again, we'll see what he does as Pope. But that's not even what this bishop here is saying in the next article. We're going here now to one of the worst bishops in the church being reported on by the German bishops. So Katholisch.de is the official news arm of the German Bishops' Conference. When they publish something, you can basically take it to the bank that is their opinion. Cardinal Hollerich is not German. He's from Luxembourg, I believe. Headline: Leo XIV will not revoke the blessing of the James Martin types. And there's a lot of details here. I'll go over the implications for American politics in another live stream. It's not really that important for our conversation today. The German bishops give you kind of a whitewashed version of this, and the Catholic Conclave gives you a better article. And I showed you the German bishops one because this is the take of the German bishops. Catholic Conclave: Cardinal Hollerich thinks new pope could reinterpret Fiducia Supplicans, but not abolish it. Not abolish it. And I think they're right that he's not going to abolish it, because at the end of the day, a let's not rock the boat papacy is going to be about unity more than anything else, it seems like. That means good luck doing a hard about face on some things. I know for conservative to traditionally minded Catholics, it's hard to hear this, but most Catholics, when you look at the data, don't agree with the church's teaching on that sin, or on a whole lot of other things. That is a massive problem, because Scripture is very clear that engaging in those inclinations, embracing those inclinations and acting upon them, is a sin that cries out to heaven for justice or vengeance, depending on your translation. It is one of the worst of the mortal sins. It's why it's weird that the hierarchy was playing footsie with it for as long as they have been. Here's what they have to say here. Quote: It will be a pontificate in continuity of the teaching of Pope Francis, quoting Cardinal Hollerich directly. And I am very happy about that. It is what the majority of cardinals wanted. Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich has a smiling face, even if he does not hide his tiredness. These have been intense days, he confides, both those of the general congregations and those of the conclave that elected Leo XIV. It actually took us 24 hours to choose the new pope, the Archbishop of Luxembourg tells Avenir. 66 years old, with a gentle but firm manner, he immediately adds, I believe it will be my first and last conclave, because I wish the Pope a long life. The new pontiff is an Augustinian, and Hollerich is a Jesuit like Francis, who has made synodality one of the hallmarks of his pontificate. A dimension dear to the Luxembourg cardinal, who is a tenacious supporter of it, and who was general rapporteur at the last synod. Pope Leo, he explains, spoke of a synodal church in his first message. Having participated in the work of the synod, we have a pontiff who knows synodality, who understands synodality, who dares synodality. There will be no revolution that no one in the church wants, but an evolution, yes, and it is the best way to change. Now, you can tell from what he's talking about here that synodality is more, his view of it is more in line with Francis. Whereas as Cardinal Prevost, Leo XIV spoke in the past about synodality as more about dialogue and listening, as opposed to devolution, decentralization, putting laity in charge of church apparatuses and things. Two very different competing ideas. And this is why I really hope that the Holy Father gives us a definition of synodality early on as a formal thing that he does. It would be very helpful to understand everything that he'll do moving forward. If he is going to, because he spoke positively about synodality, but we don't know what that means from him. Even Francis shied away from defining it, letting the process define it instead. He says, and he's asked, what can we expect from the new Pope? And he says, not a copy of Pope Francis, because a copy is in itself weak and is never as beautiful as the original. He will have his own style and characteristics, but in the wake of Francis. Of course, we did not choose him because he seems less flashy than his predecessor. And it goes on, and he says, and he goes on to talk about this, including about the James Martin sin and the rest, and again, how he will not be rocking the boat on that he will embrace fiducia supplicans. And that is a red flag. If it were true, and I'm not convinced that it is. But I'm not convinced he's going to repeal that document either. What has he said his papacy is about? Unity and peace in the church. How do you have that if you repeal a document that is widely popular among lay Catholics and among a great number of bishops? And that is hard for people to hear. But most Catholics, according to all the research data, do not agree with the church's teaching on that, or on contraception, or on marital activities done when you're not married, and a whole host of other things. And this is why you should pray for the Holy Father, that the charisms of the office he holds strengthen his resolve, strengthen his perception of things, and gives him the spine he needs to act in ways that will not be popular. This disregarding of Catholic morality by so many bishops is a sign of apostasy. People should take it seriously and pray and turn to their rosaries or turn to their mass intentions or whatever other ways of prayer you have and pray for the Holy Father. That is the best way to do it. JMJ says the dubia should be submitted again by the good cardinals. Oh, absolutely. This is a great opportunity to submit the dubia. Now, this is, of course, not the only thing we see. We've seen a focus of many fringe bishops and cardinals to push the Holy Father to continue pushing the church to change her teachings onto that sin that Father James Martin, FJ, has an unholy focus on, as well as on who can be ordained. A lot of forces want the church to change the teachings on who can be ordained, the limits or restrictions on the sacrament of holy orders. But those are not actually the most absurd things that we've seen people focus on in the coming days, because women's ordination, the James Martin sin, sins of the flesh in general are unfortunately deviations from orthodoxy on that are nothing new, unfortunately, for Catholics. Some people now are focused on the Holy Father's ethnicity, which is weird because a lot of us don't really care what the race of the Holy Father is, as long as he's the best man for the job, right? We don't care. Just give us a holy man, someone who loves Jesus Christ, wants to spread that love to others, and loves souls enough to prevent them from violating the commandments that God gave down to us. See, the Holy Father is Creole. If you're not American, let me give you a quick version of this. Ethnically, he's from Louisiana, and his ethnic roots in all the major groups have been in Louisiana for centuries, and this includes the descendants of Africans. There are two ways to approach thinking about this. There's also French and a few other groups. You can, one, take it to be an interesting story that can be symbolically positive for some groups, or you can go over the top and take it too far. There's a case study on two different approaches, and I can't believe I'm about to cite these guys positively, but it does happen on occasion. Headline from the National Catholic Reporter, of all organizations: Pope Leo XIV's Creole heritage highlights complex history of being hateful based on the content of one's genetics and the church in America. That word here on YouTube is no bueno. Found that one out the hard way. I understand some people finding it interesting, taking it to be a positive thing. They can see a little of themselves in there. Okay, fine. There's way too much emphasis on that these days in the world, I think, personally. But I get it. But there's a way to take that too far. And let's do a compare and contrast here. In the article, quote, the new Pope's French-sounding last name, Prevost, intrigued Jari Honora, a New Orleans genealogist who began digging in the archives and discovered the Pope had deep roots in the Big Easy. For those not in the U.S., the Big Easy is New Orleans. All four of Pope Leo XIV's maternal great-grandparents were, quote, free people of color in Louisiana, based on 19th century census records Honora found. As part of the melting pot of French, Spanish, African, and Native American cultures in Louisiana, the Pope's maternal ancestors would be considered a Creole. It was special for me because I share that heritage, and so do many of my friends who are Catholic here in New Orleans, said Honora, a historian at the Historic New Orleans Collection, a museum in the French Quarter. Honora and others in the Black and Creole Catholic communities say the election of Leo, a Chicago native who spent over 2 decades in Peru, including 8 years as a bishop, is just what the Catholic Church needs to unify the worldwide church and elevate the profile of Black Catholics whose history and contributions have long been overlooked. As an aside, I do get that to a degree, because when there's this perception that in the US and Europe that Catholicism is a religion for European descended people, which is weird when you look at the demographics of where the church is growing or has been solid, relatively speaking, in the last few centuries. South America, Africa, and Asia, none of which really fit the it's a European's religion mentality. But when you listen to people who are hostile to the church talk about it and are trying to win people away from Catholicism, that is often one way they frame it. So this is at least a good counter narrative for that, because their claim is absurd. Leo, who has not spoken publicly about his roots, may also have an ancestral connection to Haiti. His grandfather, Joseph Norval Martinez, may have been born there, though historical records are conflicting, Honora said. However, Martinez's parents, the Pope's great-grandparents, were living in Louisiana since at least the 1850s, he said. Andrew Jolivet, a professor of sociology and Afro-Indigenous studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, did his own digging and found the Pope's ancestry reflected the unique cultural tapestry of southern Louisiana. The Pope's Creole roots draw attention to the complex, nuanced identities Creoles hold, he said. There is Cuban ancestry on his maternal side, so there are a number of firsts here, and it's a matter of pride for Creoles, said Jolivet, whose family is Creole from Louisiana. So I also view him as a Latino Pope because the influence of Latino heritage cannot be ignored in the conversation about Creoles. Most Creoles are Catholic, and historically it was their faith that kept families together as they migrated to larger cities like Chicago, he said. The former Cardinal Robert Prevost's maternal grandparents, identified as essentially having mixed background in historic records, married in New Orleans in 1887 and lived in the city's historically Creole 7th Ward. In the coming years, the laws from the South that kept people apart rolled back post-Civil War reforms, and just about every aspect of their lives was circumscribed by their content of their ethnicity, he said. And it goes on, frames it in the American story of that. It's a topic I've never found all that interesting, but maybe that's just because I'm part of the majority. I don't know. I find it a weird way of talking about Catholics, though, for Catholics to be that focused on it, aside from maybe it being of interest and for some very personal reasons. And as annoying as that kind of framing can be for many of us, that's nothing. This one takes the cake. Headline from Fox News. Sonny Hostin changes tune on Pope Leo XIV after learning of Haitian roots, declares we have a black pope. The View co-host was previously concerned over the American pontiff's past statements on the James Martin lifestyle. We go back to what Cardinal Hollerich and others are saying about how he's going to keep the blessings of the James Martin sin going. His past statements on that sin are very, very Catholic sounding. So this is why we don't know what he's going to do on it. And no, I'm not, don't worry, I'm not going to play a clip from The View for you. People got really mad when I did that before. But as a general thing, they're focusing here on what I consider to be the most superficial thing you could possibly do, because we're concerned about the salvation of souls. And yes, we are concerned about just social arrangements and that, because those things can be an obstacle to the salvation of souls and violate human dignity, right? Basic Catholic social teaching stuff. Sonny Hostin is a character, and like many of them, are completely obsessed with the wrong things when it comes to Christianity. From the article, quote, The View co-host Sonny Hostin revealed Monday she now loves Pope Leo XIV after discovering his black background. Hostin has previously expressed concerns about the new pontiff on Friday after his comments referencing the James Martin lifestyle resurfaced. On Monday, she spoke more optimistically about Pope Leo after learning his maternal grandparents were described as people of color on documents, with his grandfather's original birthplace listed as Haiti. There's one thing that is a very interesting thing is very interesting to me, because President Trump, as you remember, called Haiti a certain type of country, Hostin said. As it turns out, our new American Pope has Haitian and black roots. So we actually have a black Pope, apparently. It's a chef's kiss for me. How many of you surprised she brought the American president into this discussion? I haven't even mentioned him really once, other than in passing as a topic for a future thing on about the Pope. But she goes right there, because politics is their religion. After Pope Leo was announced on Thursday, Hostin said she was concerned about the James Martin community based on a statement he made in 2012 as a bishop, where he described how pop culture had fostered sympathy for beliefs and practices that are at odds with the gospel, including that James Martin lifestyle and alternative families comprised of very deluded people and who are allowed to adopt kids for some reason. The article doesn't quite say that. That's my characterization. Hostin on Monday said she was more encouraged by Pope Leo based on comments from 2023, when she thought showed he had completely changed his position. He said, he believes what Pope Francis believed, is that a church is a church for everyone. The church is very inclusive. So I'm liking this guy a lot. I'm loving the Pope, Hostin said. I'm going to pause here. If you're wondering why there's a dichotomy between his statement in 2012 and 2023, it's because a lot of cardinals will not countersignal the Holy Father under any circumstances. He'd have to be out there basically engaging in the sacrifice to Moloch in St. Peter's Square himself for them to come out and contradict anything the Holy Father says. It's one of the reasons why Cardinal Sarah never had a chance. It's one of the reasons why Cardinal Burke, his name was never brought up in the real conversation for who could become the Holy Father, because they challenged Pope Francis. And cardinals typically really hate that. And it could just be that he was aligning his self with Pope Francis, at least verbally, because that's generally what they did. What the cardinals do, and she loves him for it. She may end up becoming disappointed. Her co-hosts Ana Navarro and Whoopi Goldberg also praised Pope Leo after he gave a speech earlier that morning voicing support for imprisoned journalists. He stands in solidarity with journalists who are imprisoned for reporting the truth and urged them to avoid ideological or partisan language. I like that. I'm digging him, Goldberg said. I love that one of his first acts was to meet with journalists and defend the right of journalists to be journalists and uncover the truth, Navarro added. And I think it's so timely that we have an American Pope, because we are going through things in this country. And it's good to show the world that not all American leaders are the same. It's good to have an American that can denounce the things happening against immigrants here, end quote. I laugh because it goes back to politics, because it always goes back to politics for them. Always. Journalists in the U.S. are fine. Okay, they're not. Okay, the president says mean things about journalists here. Cry me a river, you'll get over it. And the Holy Father's right. Journalists should not go to jail for being journalists. That's not controversial in the Western world. In other parts of the world, that is very controversial. Go to Venezuela. Take a look what's going on down there. Or on the other side of the former Iron Curtain. Go look what's happened there. And you'll see that people who are just trying to report the truth, who are actually doing the job of a journalist, which is a very useful job in a even vaguely democratic world, face real consequences for trying to do their job. So yeah, no, he's not wrong for doing that. But they bring it back to America because they're propagandists. And as propagandists, they're trying to twist the Holy Father into their own image, and they're using the entry point of one of the most inconsequential things of all of them, the content of his genetics. Why do they care that much? I've encountered very few Catholics who care that much. some of the most right-wing, if you want to call them that, Catholics I know were wanting Cardinal Sarah to be their pope. Okay, so again, I don't know what they're driving at here. They wouldn't have liked Cardinal Sarah anyway, because he had some pretty spicy things to say about the subject of migration. As GMJ says, politics is their religion. It is. I get the feeling George likes my use of the word inclusive when I go inclusive. Well, and there's a difference between a church that is inclusive and then inclusion being your byword, your part of your gospel, because you're using inclusion in the word in the sense of the secular world, which is what they were doing there. Catholicism is a universal religion. It is open to every single human being on the planet because Jesus came and gave himself up on the cross to open up the doors of heaven to anybody, any human being who would cooperate with his grace and chose to walk the path that Jesus tells us to walk. To be in union with his bishops, to listen to what they teach, and to cooperate with the grace, and to stop sinning, and to believe. And yeah, it's a little more complicated than that, obviously. But that's kind of when you boil it down. It has nothing to do with what your skin looks like. It really doesn't. And it's open for everybody. Many don't know this. I'm a big fan of Archbishop Lefebvre. Don't think he did anything wrong. His excommunication was clearly invalid. He will be raised to the altars one day as a saint. But he became famous in the church for leading the Holy Ghost Fathers in Africa to bring souls into the church. And yeah, he used the traditional mass to do it, because it was like in the 30s and 40s when he was doing it. Maybe even earlier. He helped Pope Pius XII write a document about the church in Africa, about missionary societies in general. The church has never been that concerned about the appearance of your flesh. Instead, the church has been more concerned about the state of your soul. It would be wonderful if we get back to that. I am very curious what you may have to say about this. Let me know in the comments. Are you that surprised about this turn towards ethnicity? Let me know. I'm curious. Hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't. It absolutely helps. So just sharing this on social media, that helps too. If you ever thought about supporting the work we do here at Return to Tradition, that would be greatly helpful. It is, there's Patreon and Subscribe Store and all those things in the description box below, all of which have been asked for by viewers of this channel, as well as that join button below for just want to go through YouTube if you want to keep it simple. Pray for the church. Pray for everybody we spoke about today. I'm not trying to rally you up against some of these cardinals. Pray for them instead, that they receive the clarity of mind that the gospel of Christ will give them. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.